The corridors of the Tudor court seemed endless, a labyrinth of polished stone and whispered secrets that Anne Marwood knew all too well. Tonight, the atmosphere was thick with unease, the very air charged with suspicion and unspoken threats. Anne moved cautiously, each step measured, her dark hair drawn back tightly to maintain her composed demeanor. Yet inside, her heart hammered fiercely against the confines of her ribcage, as if desperate to escape the peril that shadowed her every move. Lady Cecily Howard's presence had become an ever-growing menace, a silent predator circling with sharp eyes and a sly smile that barely concealed the venom beneath. Cecily's ambition was no secret in the court, nor was her ruthless desire to see Queen Elizabeth's reign falter. Tonight, Anne felt the weight of those intentions more keenly than ever. As Anne turned a corner, the faintest sound, a soft rustle of silk, alerted her. From the dim recesses emerged Lady Cecily, her gaze immediately locking onto Anne's with a piercing intensity that seemed to strip away all pretense. "Anne," Cecily's voice was low, silk-laced with menace. "There are whispers, you know. Secrets don't stay buried long in this court." Anne's breath caught. She was acutely aware of the dagger concealed beneath her gown, a silent blade that could topple kingdoms if revealed. Maintaining her calm, she smiled thinly. "Whispers are the currency of the court, Lady Cecily. They often say more about the teller than the tale." But the look in Cecily's eyes suggested this was a game far more dangerous than mere gossip. Anne's mind raced, calculating risks and weighing words. Any misstep could expose the dagger, and with it, the deadly conspiracy threatening the Queen's life. Retreating swiftly, Anne found refuge in her chambers, a modest room, illuminated by the flickering glow of a single candle. Shadows danced across the walls as her trembling fingers reached for the dagger, tracing its cold, unyielding steel. The weight of her secret pressed upon her like a physical burden. Youthful inexperience gnawed at her confidence, yet beneath the fear burned a fierce determination to protect the crown she revered. She knew she could not face this alone. The court was a web of intrigue, and trust was a fragile thread easily severed. Yet, there was one she could rely upon: Sir Thomas Wycliffe. His loyalty was steadfast, his bravery a beacon amid the encroaching darkness. Later, under the shroud of night, Anne met Sir Thomas in the garden's secluded shadows. The rustling leaves whispered secrets as they spoke in hushed tones. "The danger grows," Anne confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lady Cecily's suspicion is no mere coincidence." Sir Thomas's gaze was resolute. "We will protect her, Anne, together." Their alliance, though tentative, kindled a spark of hope. Yet the stakes were clear. One misstep could mean death, not only for them but for the Queen herself. The following morning, Anne sought counsel with Lady Margaret Seymour, whose silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes bore the wisdom of years spent navigating the treacherous tides of Tudor politics. In the quiet of the Queen's audience chamber, shielded by heavy tapestries that muffled the noise of the bustling court, Lady Margaret's voice was firm yet kind. "You carry a heavy burden," she said, "but remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Anne absorbed the words, feeling them anchor her resolve. The dagger's shadow loomed large, but she would not falter. The court was a battlefield of whispers and steel, and she was determined to emerge not as a pawn, but as a protector of the crown. As the day wore on, Anne moved with renewed purpose, her keen intuition guiding her through the tangled web of alliances and enmities. Yet, the question lingered like a ghost in her mind: how long before the dagger's secret could no longer be hidden? And when that day came, would she possess the strength to confront the darkness that threatened to engulf them all? The dagger's shadow stretched long and ominous, but Anne Marwood's spirit burned brighter, still fierce, unyielding, and ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The chill of early evening settled over the Tudor court, wrapping its ancient stone walls in a cold embrace that seemed to seep into the very marrow of the palace. Anne Marwood moved softly through the dim corridors, her footsteps muted against the worn tapestry runners. Her heart fluttered like a captive bird, the weight of the secret she bore pressing ever more heavily upon her. Tonight, unlike other nights where silence offered a reprieve, she was to receive a message, one cloaked in shadows and danger. In the small, suffocating space of the chapel, the flicker of candlelight danced across the faces of saints carved in stone, their vacant eyes seeming to watch over the unfolding drama. Father Ambrose waited, a figure as much a part of the twilight gloom as the shadows themselves. His robes hung loosely, the threadbare fabric whispering secrets as he shifted nervously. "You must be vigilant, Mistress Marwood," he said quietly, his voice barely above a breath. The flickering flame cast shifting patterns on his lined face, shadows deepening the hollows beneath his eyes. "The dagger you carry is but one thread in a web that tightens with every passing hour." Anne nodded, swallowing the lump that threatened to rise. "Who sent the warning?" He shook his head, his lips pressed thin. "An ally unknown but trusted, the plot thickens. The attempt will come soon." From his hand, she accepted a folded note, the parchment rough and faintly scented with lavender. The weight of it felt heavier than mere paper, a harbinger of peril. Retreating to her chambers, Anne closed the heavy oak door behind her, the click echoing like a death knell in the quiet. The room was small but orderly, the faint scent of beeswax candles mingling with the faintest trace of rosewater. She unfolded the note with trembling fingers, eyes skimming the careful script. "The Queen's life hangs by a thread. Trust none but the fiercest flame. The dagger's shadow looms closer than you think." A shiver raced down Anne's spine. The words were vague yet unmistakably dire. She pressed her palms to her face, the coolness grounding her swirling thoughts. The court, already a maze of whispered threats and veiled glances, now seemed a powder keg ready to ignite. As dawn's pale fingers crept through the latticed window and sought Lady Margaret Seymour's chambers, finding the older woman in her morning ritual, arranging freshly cut lilies in a delicate silver vase, Anne hesitated before speaking. "Lady Margaret, I have received a warning. The danger approaches more swiftly than we feared." Margaret's eyes narrowed, the silver strands at her temples catching the light like threads of steel. "I feared as much. The court's undercurrents grow restless, and all too many eyes watch for a single misstep. You must tread carefully, Anne. Trust no one beyond this circle." Anne felt the weight of the council settle over her, a mantle as heavy as any crown. The Queen's safety was no longer a distant concern, but a battle waged in shadows and secrets. Later, in the shadowed courtyard, where the moon cast silver light over cobblestones slick with dew, Sir Thomas Wycliffe awaited. His broad frame was a solid presence against the night, his gaze steady and unwavering. "The Queen's guard is ever vigilant," he said softly, the roughness of his voice a comfort amid uncertainty. "We will not let the blade find her flesh." Anne met his gaze, gratitude and determination mingling in her chest. "But the threat comes closer each day. We must be cunning as well as brave." Sir Thomas nodded, the lines of worry etched faintly around his eyes. "Then we shall be both." Together, they plotted the delicate dance of protection and deception, knowing that every whispered word, every sidelong glance could betray them. The dagger's shadow stretched long across the court, a silent spectre heralding the coming storm. As the night deepened, Anne lay awake, the cryptic note clenched in her hand like a talisman. The court's grandeur felt brittle and fragile, a gilded cage where loyalty was a dangerous currency. Beneath the surface of velvet gowns and polished silver, treachery stirred, and Anne was caught in its deadly current. The warning had come, and with it, the knowledge that the game had changed. The Queen's life depended now not only on courage but on secrets kept and trust withheld. Anne's resolve hardened. She would face the coming darkness with fierce loyalty, even if it demanded the ultimate sacrifice. Outside her window, the first faint cries of the night watch echoed through the corridors, a reminder that in this palace of power, vigilance was the price of survival. The dagger waited, and so did the peril. In the days that followed, Anne moved through the court like a shadow, every step measured, every glance calculated. The whispers grew louder, the eyes more watchful. She confided only in Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas, their fragile alliance a beacon amid the swirling deceit. Father Ambrose's visits became more frequent, his information vital yet fraught with risk. Each meeting was a delicate balance between gaining knowledge and guarding secrets, for a single slip could unravel everything. Anne's nights were restless, haunted by visions of steel flashing in candlelight and the Queen's serene face marred by betrayal. Yet beneath the fear, a fierce flame burned, a determination to protect the realm and the woman who ruled it with iron will and subtle grace. As the palace prepared for the coming royal event, where the dagger's shadow promised to fall, Anne steeled herself. The whispered warnings had set the stage. The final act was imminent. And in the heart of the Tudor court, amidst tapestries and treachery, a young lady in waiting would stand as the last line of defense against the blade destined to change history. But who would survive the coming storm, and at what cost? Anne's story was far from over, and the night held its breath, waiting for the next move in a deadly game of power and sacrifice. The heavy oak door to the private audience chamber creaked open, and a slender figure slipped inside under the cloak of twilight. The flickering candlelight revealed the anxious face of a courtier whose loyalty had wavered for weeks. The tension evident in the slight tremble of his hand as he approached Lord Edmund Grey. Grey's cold grey eyes narrowed as the whispered confession reached his ears. "So, the dagger lies hidden with the Queen's own lady in waiting," he murmured, voice low but laced with venomous glee. "This changes everything." The courtier swallowed hard, knowing the weight of his betrayal, but unable to resist the promise of power that Grey dangled before him. Outside the chamber, the corridors of the Tudor court remained oblivious to the storm brewing beneath their polished surfaces. Meanwhile, Anne Marwood sat alone in her chamber, the morning sun casting pale light through the lattice window. Her delicate features were drawn tight with worry. The secret she had guarded so fiercely was no longer safe. The knock at her door startled her. Lady Margaret Seymour entered swiftly, her silver-streaked hair catching the light like a beacon. "Anne, word travels fast. A trusted courtier has betrayed you," Lady Margaret said, her piercing eyes scanning Anne's face for signs of fear. Anne's breath hitched. "How much do they know?" "Enough to endanger the Queen and us all. We must act quickly." The door opened again, and Sir Thomas Wycliffe stepped inside, his broad shoulders tense, hands clenched. "I will stand by you, Anne, but we need a plan now." The three huddled close beneath the heavy tapestry adorning the wall, voices hushed but urgent. The great hall beyond buzzed with the murmur of courtiers, their eyes darting suspiciously, as rumors spread like wildfire. Trust was a scarce commodity, and Anne felt its absence keenly. In the shadows, Lady Cecily Howard watched with a cruel smile playing on her lips. Her sharp eyes gleamed with satisfaction as the plot thickened. "Let them scramble," she whispered, knowing the Queen's safety was more vulnerable than ever. Anne's mind raced. The dagger, the symbol of death and power, had become a deadly burden. She had to protect the Queen at all costs, but with betrayal so close, question remained: who could she trust? As the day progressed, Anne navigated a labyrinth of whispers and glances, each step fraught with peril. The court's delicate balance teetered on the edge of chaos, and Anne's resolve hardened. She would not let the crown fall on her watch. Yet, beneath the surface of political machinations and whispered conspiracies, a darker truth, one that threatened to unravel everything Anne held dear. The dagger was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of the fragile power held by Queen Elizabeth I, and now, the blade's shadow loomed over the entire realm. Anne's journey from cautious observer to decisive actor was about to be tested as never before. The betrayal had thrust her into a desperate race against time, where every ally might be an enemy in disguise, and every choice could mean life or death. With the conspirators closing in, the court held its breath. Anne's courage, cunning, and fierce loyalty were all that stood between the queen and the abyss. The dagger's secret was out, the game had changed, and so had Annie's fate. The flickering candlelight danced against the walls as Anne paced her chamber, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her chest like a physical force. The betrayal had shattered the fragile veil of safety she had wrapped around herself, casting her into a world where trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Lady Margaret's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her own fears. We must alert the Queen discreetly. The court is rife with spies, and Lord Grey's men will be watching closely. Sir Thomas nodded grimly. I'll increase the guards near Her Majesty and keep a close watch on the corridors. But we need to find out who betrayed you if we can silence them before they cause more harm. Anne clenched her fists. I thought I knew whom I could trust. But now Lady Margaret interjected, we move carefully. The court is a maze of secrets, and one wrong step could be fatal. The three formed a silent pact, their alliance forged in the crucible of impending danger. Outside, the court carried on, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath its polished veneer. After Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas departed to carry out their tasks, Anne sat by the window, the cool morning breeze stirring the heavy curtains. The dagger lay hidden beneath her garments, a deadly secret pulsing against her side. Her thoughts drifted to her family, how fragile their loyalty seemed now, and how the political tides threatened to tear them apart. The burden was heavier than ever, but Anne's resolve hardened. She would protect the Queen, no matter the cost. The distant sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Anne's heart quickened. Every shadow now held a threat. Every glance was a potential betrayal. As she steeled herself for the trials ahead, the fragile peace of the Tudor court shattered, and the true battle for the crown's survival began. The dagger's shadow had fallen, and Anne Marwood was caught in its deadly grasp. The heavy oaken door to the servants' passage creaked open, just enough for Anne Marwood to slip inside, her small frame swallowed by the shadows immediately beyond. Torchlight flickered faintly from sconces mounted with an even spacing along the stone walls, casting dancing shapes that seemed to conspire with the dark to hide her flight. Her breath came quick and shallow, the weight of the dagger beneath her cloak a constant reminder of the peril she bore. Behind her, the murmured voices of pursuing courtiers echoed faintly, urgent and searching, but the labyrinth beneath the Tudor court was Anne's secret refuge. She moved swiftly, yet cautiously, feet soundless upon the cold flagstones, her eyes adjusting to dimness as she navigated the twisting corridors. Every corner held the possibility of discovery. Every shadow seemed to whisper betrayal. The scent of damp stone and aged wood filled the air, mingling with the faint trace of smoke from distant hearths above. A sudden clatter echoed from a loose stone, and Anne froze, heart pounding fiercely against her ribs. After a tense moment, only silence answered. Ahead, a narrow iron staircase spiraled upward, promising escape or confrontation. But Anne knew she could not face her pursuers alone. Her mind raced, recalling the steady presence of Lady Margaret Seymour and the fierce loyalty of Sir Thomas Wycliffe. They had to meet, to plan, to act. The Queen's life and the fragile peace of the realm depended on it. Anne reached a small chamber concealed behind a false wall, a hidden refuge known only to a handful. There Lady Margaret awaited, her silver-streaked hair catching the low torchlight, her piercing eyes sharp with worry and resolve. Sir Thomas stood nearby, broad-shouldered and tense, his sword sheathed, but his hand never far from the hilt. The air was thick with urgency and unspoken fear. "You made it," Lady Margaret said quietly, her voice a balm against the storm. "We feared you'd been caught." "Barely," Anne whispered, drawing the dagger from beneath her cloak and placing it on the rough oak table between them. "They know now. The dagger is no longer a secret." Sir Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then we have little time. Lord Grey's men will come for it and for you." Together, they bent over the map of the court's chambers and corridors, tracing possible routes of escape and paths to intercept their enemies. The conspirators' network was vast and shadowed, but so too was the knowledge Anne and her allies wielded. Each whispered strategy, each careful consideration of risks and strengths, shaped a fragile web of resistance. Anne felt the weight of her youth and inexperience, but also the hard edge of determination growing inside her. "We must protect the Queen," she said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath, "and expose those who would see her fall." Lady Margaret nodded. "Careful, child. The court is a serpent's nest. One wrong move and we are all undone." Sir Thomas's eyes met Anne's, fierce and unwavering. "I will stand by you whatever comes." Outside the chamber, distant footsteps approached, muffled but unmistakable. Anne pressed her back against the cold stone wall, the dagger a cold comfort in her clenched hand. Fear rippled through her, but beneath it surged a fierce loyalty, an unyielding flame that would not be extinguished. The night stretched on, a tense vigil of whispered plans and guarded hope. For Anne Marwood, the flight was only the beginning. The true battle for the crown, and for her own survival, lay ahead. And as dawn threatened the horizon, she steeled herself for the coming storm, knowing the fragile alliance she'd forged might be the realm's last hope. But even as they plotted, unseen eyes watched from the shadows, and the dagger's deadly purpose loomed ever closer. The game of power was far from over, and Anne's courage would be tested in ways she had yet to imagine. The corridors whispered secrets, the flickering torchlight played tricks, and the crown's fate hung by a slender thread one Anne was determined to hold. And so, in the heart of the Tudor court's darkness, a plan took shape, fragile yet fierce, born of fear, loyalty, and the desperate hope to protect a queen and a kingdom. The night was far from over, and the dagger's shadow stretched long. The great hall of Whitehall was awash in light and sound, a glittering arena where the Tudor court displayed its power and splendor. Hundreds of candles, nestled in ornate sconces and chandeliers, cast a warm golden glow upon the polished wooden floor and the rich tapestries that lined the walls. The scent of beeswax mingled with subtle hints of lavender and rosewater, perfumes worn by ladies and gentlemen alike, weaving an invisible tapestry of scent that added to the evening's grandeur. Anne Marwood stood near the eastern dais, her eyes fixed on Queen Elizabeth I. The Queen herself was a vision of regal authority, her red hair coiled tightly beneath a jeweled French hood, her gown embroidered with pearls and silver thread that caught the light with every subtle movement. Elizabeth's sharp gaze swept the crowd, her lips curved in a practiced smile that hid the constant vigilance demanded by her position. Anne's heart beat unevenly beneath the fine fabric of her gown. Months of careful concealment, whispered warnings, and shadowed glances had led to this night. The dagger she had secreted away, the very blade, meant to end the Queen's reign, was suddenly poised to strike once more. The weight of its presence pressed on Anne's chest, a coiled serpent threatening to strike. The murmurs of the courtiers rose and fell like the tide, punctuated by the soft clink of goblets and the rustle of silk. Lady Margaret Seymour stood a few paces away, her silver-streaked hair framing a face that bore the marks of years spent navigating the treacherous waters of court intrigue. Her piercing eyes never left the Queen, ever watchful, ever calculating. Sir Thomas Wycliffe, broad-shouldered and grim-faced, patrolled near the rear of the hall. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, muscles taut and ready. Though outwardly a royal guard, he was Anne's secret ally, bound by loyalty to protect the Queen and those who served her faithfully. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A subtle movement at the fringes of the crowd caught Anne's attention, a figure cloaked and masked, weaving through the nobles with unnerving purpose. The murmurs dulled to a hush as the figure drew closer to the dais, the glint of steel flashing in the candlelight. Gasps shattered the fragile calm as the masked attacker lunged forward, dagger raised high. The blade caught the firelight, a cruel gleam that seemed to pierce the very heart of the court. Time seemed to slow for Anne. The cacophony of startled voices melted into a roar in her ears. Instinct propelled her forward. She surged through the crowd, her breath sharp and ragged, fingers closing around the hilt of the dagger mid-thrust. The cold metal sent a jolt through her, but her grip held firm. The hall erupted into chaos as Sir Thomas sprang into action, his sword flashing in a swift arc to subdue the would-be assassin. Lady Margaret's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, restoring order amidst the turmoil. Her eyes met Anne's, conveying a silent message of approval and urgency. The Queen, though shaken, remained poised, her gaze steady and unyielding. Amid the uproar, Anne's gaze flickered to the shadows where Lord Edmund Grey stood, his tall frame rigid with suppressed fury. His cold grey eyes locked with hers for a moment, a silent vow passing between adversaries. The dagger's resurfacing had shattered the fragile veneer of peace within the court, exposing the dangerous undercurrents that threatened to engulf them all. Anne's swift action had saved the Queen, but the path ahead was fraught with peril. As attendants restrained the attacker and whispers rippled through the gathered nobles, Anne felt the heavy weight of responsibility settle anew. The court's labyrinthine intrigues had become a battlefield, and she was no longer a mere observer, but a decisive player in the struggle for the crown's survival. The night deepened, the candles burning low, but the fire ignited within Anne's heart blazed brighter than ever. Loyalty demanded sacrifice, courage demanded action. The dagger might have been seized, but the fight for the realm's future was far from over. "The blade is but the beginning," Lady Margaret murmured as she approached Anne, her voice low yet resolute. "We must be ever vigilant." Anne nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight and steely determination. "For the Queen," she whispered, "and for the realm." Outside, the echoes of footsteps and distant voices signaled the gathering storm. Within the walls of Whitehall, the game had changed, and Anne Marwood was ready to play her part, whatever the cost. The hall's heavy oak doors closed behind the commotion, but Anne's mind raced ahead, plotting the next move in a deadly dance where trust was scarce and betrayal could come from any shadow. The dagger's legacy was not yet sealed, and the blade's edge still cut deep. As the Queen's court resumed its uneasy rhythm, Anne's thoughts lingered on the faces around her, the allies, the enemies, the uncertain. Each held a secret, a motive, a piece of the perilous puzzle. The night had tested her courage, but the true battle lay in the days to come. With a final glance at Elizabeth, radiant despite the threat, Anne vowed silently to protect the crown with every fibre of her being. The royal event was over, but the war for the throne was only beginning, and Anne Marwood was ready to meet it head-on. The heavy oak door to the council chamber groaned as it swung inward, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and old parchment. Anne Marwood's heart beat a frantic rhythm in her chest, each step towards the gathered nobles feeling like a march into the jaws of a trap. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering flames of wall sconces, their shadows dancing against tapestries that bore the Queen's emblem. At the center, Lord Edmund Grey stood tall and unyielding, his cold grey eyes scanning the assembly with the unmistakable air of a predator surveying his prey. Beside him, a handful of courtiers shifted restlessly, their faces masks of carefully rehearsed loyalty and hidden ambition. Anne's gaze snapped to the figure seated across the chamber, the trusted courtier whose smile had once seemed warm and honest, now twisted with the weight of unspoken guilt. His eyes avoided hers, darting nervously to the floor as he finally spoke, voice low and trembling. "I had no choice. Lord Grey threatened my family's safety. I revealed the secret to protect them." A cold shiver ran through Anne despite the chamber's warmth. Betrayal tasted bitter on her tongue, sharper than the dagger she had hidden so carefully. The air seemed to thicken, charged with tension as murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Lady Margaret Seymour's silver-streaked hair caught the firelight as she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. This treachery endangers not only the Queen but the realm itself. Sir Thomas Wycliffe's broad shoulders squared in silent support beside Anne, his steady presence a small comfort amid the storm. Anne forced herself to meet the eyes of the betrayer, searching for any sign of the man she had once trusted. There was none, only fear and shame. Outside, the clamor of the court began to swell as news of the betrayal spread. Whispers twisted through the corridors like serpents, and Anne felt the cold weight of isolation settle upon her shoulders. She slipped away from the chamber, seeking refuge in the royal gardens where the night air was cool, and the scent of blooming jasmine clung to the breeze. Here, beneath a canopy of stars, the betrayal stung sharpest not just the danger it brought, but the shattering of trust. Yet, even in this solitude, the fierce flame of loyalty burned within her. Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas found her moments later in the shadowed alcove, their faces etched with concern but resolute. Lady Margaret's hand rested lightly on Anne's arm, steadying her. "We will not let this treachery break us. The Queen's safety depends on our courage now more than ever." Sir Thomas's voice was low but fierce. "We stand with you, Anne. Together, we will unravel this conspiracy and protect Her Majesty." The betrayal had unmasked the danger lurking in the heart of the court, but it had also forged a new alliance, tempered in the fires of adversity. Anne's eyes, once uncertain and cautious, now gleamed with determination. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she would walk it boldly, for the crown and for the Queen she vowed to defend. As dawn approached, the first pale light filtering through stained glass, Anne allowed herself a moment's breath. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. Yet, she would not falter. The blade hidden close to her heart was not only a weapon of destruction, but a symbol of the sacrifices demanded by loyalty and the fierce courage needed to wield it. The night had revealed the faces of betrayal, but it had also ignited the flame of resistance. And Anne Marwood would be its fiercest guardian. The chamber doors opened once more, footsteps echoing with intent.